Gerard Jagers of Achterhaus is a Dutch biologist and philosopher of science, best known for developing the operator theory or O theory, a general framework for understanding complexity and hierarchical organization in nature. He holds Ph.D.s in ecotoxicology and in physics. Over his career, he's authored or co-authored over 100 publications, including monographs such as The Operator Hierarchy, The Pursuit of Complexity, Evolution and Transitions in Complexity, and the recent The Third Law of Evolution and the Future of Life in 2024. His work bridges ecology, philosophy of biology, systems theory, and even perspectives relevant for artificial intelligence and future hypothetical technical life forms. Gerard?
Hello to everyone. I must say I immensely enjoyed the meeting so far. And I've heard many interesting things. And I have given some comments that were sort of a preview of, I hope that I will tell something interesting to you. I just because André was just before me, I like to cite a few things, like we need to radicalize and advance Darwin. I heard him saying that. We need an innovative theory, and where does all the organization come from? Well, these are questions that have plagued me during day and night sometimes in finding an answer. My talk is about evolution and about whether we could extend that to the future and the role for big history. So I think evolution originally has a meaning like unrolling. And then evolver means unrolling. It shows the next part of the scroll, indifferent. Stuart Kaufman talks about the adjacent possible in this context. And I think this type of evolution is a synonym for all kinds of change. Actually, it's sort of the broadest container for the concept. But what we frequently discuss is evolution with selection. And that's a narrower part of the large thing. And what do you select for? I think Darwin means selection for performance. And he talks about descent with modification through variation and selection. Well, variation, he put that in later because I think he realized that just selection is adding nothing new and that you need variation after reproduction to get a creative force in evolution. Well, just as an example, I think we all know evolution. You have a peppered moth in England. That was a good example. It starts white, and then there are some blue ones, and they're eaten. And then there are more blue. Oh, the white ones are eaten, sorry, and the blue ones are not seen. And then you end up with a darker variety. I think for the time being, a variety, not a species, because they probably could breed very well. So it's easy to predict evolution on this large scale because if you start with white moth, you have a dark environment, there is selection for visibility, you will end up with black moth. So evolution already at this high level is predictable, but only in a sort of general direction. And now I hope to make a link to predicting evolution and selection on a cosmic scale. Well, this is what we normally have in big history. It started at the left with a Big Bang. And the question we have, is this combinatorial explosion, does that hide some kind of predictable order? Well, there are many ways of ordering this, but frequently there are things in the way like, we have a star and that makes atoms heavier nuclei, and then the nuclei after the stars explode make a new star. So we have sort of a shortcut here, a cycle of something that we need to discuss separately. And then we have like from the dust at the beginning, stars and planets form, and then you have bacteria. Oh, I have no pointer actually. Then you have bacteria, and that makes the earth green. And then we have humans in the end emerging. So that's another path that we need to examine. And among all these possible worlds or possibilities, what would be a smart way to cut this all into pieces? Well, if you make a prediction, the pieces that you want to cut universal evolution into need to show some sort of logic. Otherwise, we can't extend the logic. So what do I mean with logic? Well, here is an example of something that is until now not very logical. Why is it not very logical? Well, the first question you could have is, are the objects of the same type? Well, clearly they are not. But we could change that by making them all into groups of poles. So now all the objects are of the same type. That's easy. But then the next question could be, are all the transitions of the same type? No, they're not, because we had from 2 to 1 to 4, and if I change that, we can get from 2 to 3 to 4, and then it's easier to make a prediction. I'm very well aware that the sequence could actually repeat or show anything after these logical series. So, of course, you have to assume that nature follows some kind of logic, and that has to be established, of course. So what logic offers, if you have it, you have clear thresholds, you have fixed steps or levels, and you can extrapolate the levels, and that is interesting. But how do we do this in nature? Because, well, as I showed, the cosmic combinatorial explosion yields an enormous amount of possibilities. So to cut it in nice chunks, I think it is interesting to explore the logic of a closed topology. And I think that can inspire stringent levels. What do I mean with a closed topology? Well, one is a cyclic process that closes. And here I like to refer to Kaufman's autocatalytic set, where all the reactions in the end make the chemicals that make all the reactions. So then the set of chemicals continues to exist by consuming external material, of course, because otherwise it couldn't. So it's not closed in the input-output sense, but it's closed in the sense that they all are linked together processually. If I break part out of this cycle, the topology is no longer closed, and the cycle will not continue to exist. Another kind of closure, closed topology, is a container. I've pictured this as like a grid around something. And if there's a hole in the grid, the ball is no longer closed, the air can flow out, and it will just not be a closed topology. And if the topology is not closed, I wrote underneath, you get no new level. So in this way of reasoning, you need to have a closed topology at the next level. But still, this would not save us from going in all directions in the combinatorial explosion, because there can be so many cyclic processes and so many containers that we are still a bit at a loss about what would be the next step. So I want to narrow down the options. And for that purpose, I'm going to combine several closures. For example, a processual closure and a spatial closure make a combination, and things can go in and out, but the cycle that is captured has to remain inside. If I break the container, well, then parts of the cycle contained can flow out, and it doesn't work as a dual closure anymore. This is a model that has done great work for me. And what I'd like to get is a specific step and a specific combination of closures that can tell me if I'm at one level and I combine several things, that I will then always arrive at the next level, where I will find a similar but more complex type of system. An atom, I will show an atom as an example. The nucleus, it has a process closure. Electron shell has a spatial closure. I will come back to these typical examples a bit further on. If you combine them with an interaction, you got an atom, and the atom shows what I call dual closure. And dual closure is the way to arrive from one level to the next level. So what is new? Well, only a system that has dual closure is an operator. So this means that in the large set of combinatorial explosive things in the universe, I separate one set of things from all the other things, and that's the set of the operators, and they have dual closure. All other systems don't have it. An operator moves as a single material unit. Why is that? Because it's also spatially closed. It's like a cell membrane containing everything of the cell. If I pull at the cell, everything in the cell and the whole cell will follow my pull. That is important because I can now talk about singular units, material units also. Because if I use dual closure, at the next step, I will get the next operator. Dual closure produces a stepwise hierarchy. That's something that has been looked for and not has been found. But in this way, I think we can go in that direction. And what you have is you have uniform steps and uniform entities along the hierarchy that you create. And that means that you can extrapolate it. And another example, as I will show, is that this way of working can be used to connect physical and biological evolution, which I think is an asset in big history. Well, dual closure adds what I call a third law to evolution. Why is that? Because the first law is what we know as variation. That means if you reproduce, you cannot be exact in your reproduction. So you will always create variation, maybe not after one generation, but then after more. And so if you reproduce, you will get variation. That's why I see it as a law. Then the second law, that's selection. That means if the variants are exposed to the environment, some of them will survive, others will die because they don't perform equally. So if that happens and they are not the same, it is almost necessary that there will be selection of, and I focus here on those that remain. Some people focus on selection as those that die or get harrowed out, weeded out. So now we have the first law and the second law. If we repeat this, we have growth and development and reproduction and death and the whole life cycle. And we have Darwin as we all know it. And what I add is the third law, which is actually I see people in the picture. I hope you only see the whole screen so that you can see the cell, because I can't see the cell now. It's dual closure. So then you get a eukaryotic cell in this case. And I will now explain step by step how dual closure works or can be seen in the complexity that we observe in the universe if I focus on operators. The operator theory is not a theory of everything. It is a theory about operators, and it leaves for the time being all the other systems out. Doesn't mean that they are not interesting, doesn't mean that they're not important, because they act as an environment for the operators to emerge, and they are the environment in which the operators emerge and act and offer new opportunities. So things are connected, but I don't show them here. So what you have at the beginning, there are quarks just after the beginning of the universe, and the quarks do something new, and that is gluon exchange. It's actually a complex kind of exchange. I'm happy that the word of exchange and interaction have been mentioned already, so that's a good introduction for this. And then there is the spatial closure. As soon as the universe expands, gluon forces are so strong, that's why they call strong force, that they link quarks into small bundles that you cannot take apart anymore. So quark confinement is a very absolute thing. if you would take a quark out, the force needed for that would be so huge that you actually create new pairs of quarks. So then you get still hadrons, as they are called. So if you have hadrons, the next step is in dual closure. First, you need a new type of process, and this time it is pion exchange, and the pions are small two-quark particles that are sort of a remnant of the strong force, what they cause. And if you have pion exchange at the core of you create a sort of a nucleus, and then if you add the electron shell, you have the nucleus contained again. So then we have processual and spatial closure, and you create the atom. A new type of process, if you have atoms, is that atoms can exchange electrons. That's actually the way how they bond. Actually, all the three steps here are a kind of condensation steps in which particles bond to the next level. It's automatic if the conditions are right, and it produces energy that is sent to the universe, and because the energy is gone, they don't have the energy to separate easily by themselves. So the shared electron creates a spatial closure, that's a shared electron shell, and so we have molecules or metal pieces. If you continue now, you get to the biological operators. I've just given the names as a preview: bacteria, eukaryotic cells, plants, and animals. And we'll see it's a bit more complicated than that, but just gives you an impression. First biological operator, the cell. Well, the cell is again based on a new type of process, and that is enzymatic activity, which is molecular in basis. It is used by Eigen in its hypercycle and by Kaufman in the autocatalytic set. So it's well known and well researched, but still there are puzzles on this field. And what I add is a spatial closure of the membrane, and then I've got a cell. And the yellow arrows indicate that the molecules interact and that the autocatalytic set interacts with the membrane, so that the third criterion of dual closure is met. A cell like this. I put it in the hierarchy now. It's the first biological option. And from there we can integrate further to the coupling of cells, because if I have one cell, I can connect the plasma as a new property. And if I connect plasma of two cells, I get a multicellular being. I'm well aware that the general opinion about multicellularity is much broader than this specific use, but that is because this use is based on topology, and I need the change in topology of connected plasma to at all be able to reason like I do in operator hierarchy. Again, the interactions are in place, and an example of this are the cyanobacteria. They are the first multicellular bacteria. I actually forgot this the first time I made the operator hierarchy around 1995, because I thought bacteria are unicellular, dot. No, they're not. There are multicellular bacteria. So from the bacteria, you go to a multicellular one, which I draw to the side, because that's not the only option to create an integration of cells, because cells can also integrate as an endosymbiontic relationship, but then a obligatory one. So the new type of process here is obligate endosymbiosis, and I wrote underneath the nucleus forms later, and that's because you need a lot of energy to create a nucleus and membranes. So it is most probable that the first thing that happens was a guest came to live in a larger cell, which I therefore name host. And this guest-host relationship gave energy to the cell to produce a nucleus and membranes inside and to become a complex host cell. I do not use the word eukaryotic cell because the karyos is not always there. When cells separate, they frequently dilute the karyos away and to separate their DNA material. So, but the guest cells are always there, and that's why I have named them host cell to be more consistent. So the host cell has this position in the hierarchy. Now I want host cells to be coupled. So then I need connected plasma between host cells. It's the same logic as for bacteria. And this gives us in this case, a very small multicellular thing. The human being developed to the 8-cell stage because at that point the plasma connections form and not earlier. And it's here in the hierarchy. So then there's an interesting step, and that is nature could not just join multicellular beings to produce a next step because the result would still be a multicellular being, and that would not be a new property. So what happened is that inside a multicellular, multi-host cellular organism, groups of host cells interact and cause a new dual closure. And which host cells could do that? Well, this is the raster of a multicellular being with plasma connections between the cells. They communicate already by means of chemical gradients, no problem. That's not new. What is new is that some cells developed extensions to communicate with cells that were further away than their neighbor, because their neighbors they already could communicate with. That was not a problem. But now they made further extensions, 25 minutes. Oh yeah, I've got a little bit lack of time. No problem. Neurons. These cells with extensions are what we call neurons. And they do something like communicate with sense organs and communicate with muscles or glands. And this group of connected neurons serves as a small memory. That's actually special
Yeah.
about them.
Sorry to interrupt, but we're at 10:25. If we want to stay on time.
Yeah, I will show a little bit more. I gave this lecture. There's too much to tell, actually. Okay, so we've got a new type of process where the neurons act as a next. The organism containing the neurons is what I call the neuron memon, and now it's on top of the hierarchy. If we now want to predict in big history, what would be then the next step? I think there are many hierarchies where it is suggested that the next step is something social or large things like cities or that sort of things. But there is a problem here. I can't do that because the city is of a different type of things. It is not an operator. And that is actually relevant because very many of our hierarchies do not focus on this type of, on the consistency of the types that they use. So what new property would a operator have? And I regret to skip through this almost too quickly. The first is dual closure is always in the hierarchy. All steps have it. The second is the multi-state. Well, if I have one quark, it will remain one quark. I can't combine them.
We're not going to have time for discussion. Just heads up on that. If we'd allow Martin to speak at 11:30.
Would you stop? Would you like to stop now, or is that the question? Then I will stop.
Well, yeah. If you want to have any discussion, there's only 3 minutes left till 11:30 Eastern time.
Yeah. I realize. Then we have discussion. Okay, so I can't tell anything about predictions, but too bad for that.
Yeah, we all had that problem. I tried to introduce a whole ethical theory in, 15, 20 minutes. It's an entire book, so we all had that problem.
Okay, there is a problem here, yes. I tried to come back to the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, sorry about that. Gerard.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm still wondering what the future is going to be, but maybe that will be a question that allows you to go back or talk about that. So open up for question, Alexander.
I ignorant concerning operator theory, but I was interested in knowing how do you show that a city is not an operator, and also I think category theory, the mathematical category theory, can model the dual operator as you describe it here. So I have a question and this remark. Thanks a lot. Very interesting talk.
A question and a remark. And the question is, why is the city not an operator? Because it doesn't have the spatial closure. There's nothing enclosing a city. And the enclosure also has to fulfill some criteria that are not possible for a city. To explain this, a quarter of an hour is not enough, absolutely not. Read my work, I would say. Bad answer, but that's the answer. And category theory, of course, depends on what kind of categories you make. I make categories based on dual closure, and if you don't do that, you get other results.
So is it fair to ask what is the next level of dual closure, or is that just going to open up for, should we look forward to your paper?
It's another half hour if you like,
Yeah.
or just 1 second. It's a technical being, but that would ask for more questions than I can answer in a minute now.
So I think you generated a lot of interest to read your paper then. That is
I think people should do that.
Cliffhanger there. I think a lot of people will be reading that. Excellent. Andre?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I enjoyed your talk. I can't say I understood it all, but I found it fascinating that you did begin with the sort of radical theory of the exchange of how did you put it? Gluons, pions, and all those. And then you later on you use the word interaction, which in my mind could also be another way of saying exchange. So I saw your hierarchy as a kind of hierarchy of exchange. And I was also wondering if by chance you've read some of the biosemiotic people like Hofmeyr and things like that, who, you're describing a semiotic system.
Yes, I am describing a semiotic system, but I don't use semiotics.
Okay.
And why not? Because I focus mainly on topology, which is sort of including semiotics if you look at it the right way.
Yeah.